Alabama, the bold one, Bobby Wood.
From New Jersey, Bruce Weston's fantastic USA 1.
Well, welcome back to another fantastic episode of American Hot Rod Association Drag Racing History Channel. On today's episode, I know it's been a while since we've done one. We actually have brought in the world famous Animal Jim Feurer from Lake, Illinois. How you doing, Jim?
Oh, pretty good. Nice weather here today. It's in the 50s, believe it or not.
Really? I was just going to ask, did you get any snow yet?
We had just flurries and real light a couple weeks ago, that's all. It's been dry.
Oh, that's surprising for an Illinois winter.
It is.
Well, to kick this whole thing off, I said you're the world famous, and in my book, you are probably, I've told you this, you're probably one of my favorite drivers ever. And I said hero, and you get mad when I say that. But you say I'm not anybody's hero. I didn't do anything special, but you did. You pretty much inspired a bunch of young men like myself at the time to want to be, a professional drag racer.
Well, yeah, people call me a hero. Guys like you are heroes. You protected our country for years in the Navy. And I tell them, well, first responders in military are heroes. I said, I'm just a guy from Illinois that liked to go fast.
And you're still the guy from Illinois that likes to go fast, right?
Yeah.
You were driving a 2006 Pontiac Gto last I talked to you?
Yeah, that's my personal car. In fact, I just retired it from full-time duty, and I got it insured with Haggerty, and it's now a classic car.
Oh,
classic car used to be 20 years. This one's only 17, but Haggerty took it since it was a special series back in 2004, 5, and 6. They went ahead and classified it.
Huh. Well, before I get too sidetracked, I wanted to start with a few questions that we had that I think our audience would be fairly interested in. You are one of the fathers of Pro Mod, if not the father of Pro Mod, but before it was Pro Mod, it originally started with just you drag racing, correct?
Yeah. I started out drag racing in the day they walked on the moon.
That was your first race?
That was my first race with my 57 Mercury called the Big Animal. And it had in fact, at that time, it had a 406 tri-power in it. Later, we went to a 427 tunnel port. But anyway, I started racing at Oswego, Illinois on July 20th, 1969. And they put me in 1D hot rod. I was running for trophies. And I won the class, which wasn't too hard to do. There weren't many in it. And we did that for a while. And then I got into the money paying class, which just started up about 71, called Run Tough Eliminator.
Okay. Was that at Oswego as well?
Yeah, that was all at Oswego. And it was basically bracket racing, but it had a couple little different quirks. All fouls counted. If you red lit or center line, you were out, both of you. If you red lit, I red lit, we were both out. If you red lit and I center lined or broke out, if you both broke out, you're all out. Even on a bye run, if you fouled, you were out.
Oh wow, easy elimination.
It made it kind of tricky, yeah. But anyway, I was track champion in 73 and 74.
Okay.
And then I decided to go pro stock racing.
Oh, so you went full bore into pro stock right away? Well,
my intention was we had a pro stock category at Oswego and US 30 over by Gary, and Oswego's up by Aurora, Illinois. And they was both owned by gold agencies. Oswego wasn't owned by them, it was leased, but US 30 was owned by gold agencies. And they had a pro stock category. and they would qualify 4 cars as a 4-car deal, and the rules were pretty loose. You had to weigh 2,700 pounds, and you could have any size engine you wanted and what have you. But you had to weigh 2,700 pounds without the driver. So the smaller you were, the better it was. But anyway, yeah. So I put together a 72 Comet with a 427 Ford tunnel port in it. And unfortunately, I used a Detroit locker in the back instead of a spool. And that's what I had in the big animal, same kind of setup. And it was a used one. What I didn't know that the cogs were worn on it. And on the first hard run, it locked up at Oswego, but not in Detroit. It slipped on one side, and it just acted like a broken axle. So the car just turned right immediately and rolled about 12 times.
Oh, wow.
Flipped up in the air like a sprinter, yeah. So that was 1975. So I went back to running the big animal for a while. And then I found this Gto, which was a Chicagoland car, and they also ran UDRA with it, United Drag Racers Association.
Okay.
And it had a Roush Cleveland engine in it, a Lenco, 4-speed, and big Dana rear end, and a 4-link. And it was a real car, though. I mean, it had real fenders, and the nose was still steel and whatever. But anyway, it ran pretty good, and they had it for sale in National Dragster in the classifieds. And I went and looked at it and bought it. So that was my first real pro stock car. But anyway, what happened right after I bought it, even though I'd quizzed gold agencies and the track operators and whatever about the if they're going to keep having pro stocks, they said, "Oh yeah, we will." The first day I went to run the Pinto at Oswego, it was in September. It was the last day that they would have pro stock there. It was also the last day they would have pro stock, period. So I had no choice, but I started running UDRA and then ran AHRA.
Right.
And did match race and whatever. And we had a Mid-America Pro Stock circuit we started too as a result of that.
Oh, because the classes went away.
Yeah.
Well, can you explain a little bit about the UDRA and where it came from? I know it was very popular in the Midwest, and they ran up through probably about 88, 89?
Well, the UDRA lasted. I think I was the last champion. In 2001, we went from pro stock to outlaw pro stock to pro modified.
Okay.
And so I won 3 championships in the United Drag Race Association in 88, 89, and then 2001.
Okay.
But it was but the UDRA was an organization where the racers paid dues, and we had our own rules and took care of our own deal and whatever, and we would get the car certified. Usually they'd have a UDRA race at one of the early NHRA division races, and we would have our cars checked over and get a chassis sticker. So anyway, that's when I got into serious pro stock racing, and the AHRA was one of my favorites. I was kind of beside myself, and I called Jim Tice. I got his phone number from Jim Naramore, and Jim says, "Yeah," he says, "call Jim Tice." He says, "They're having an event this weekend at St. Louis. It was the Gateway Nationals. I think it was 1976." And I called down there, and by God, this is before cell phones, needless to say. And Jim got on the phone, and he says, "Yeah, come on down. We'll find a place for you," and all this and that. And I said, "Well, now I got to tell you," I said, this car's got Lexan windows in the doors and whatever, and that won't make any difference. So anyway, we went down there on Saturday, and they'd already been qualifying on Friday, and they did one round. We got there just in time for the last shot, and we weighed in, and I bumped my way into number 6 position. And my first opposition was Rich Thomas, who became a good friend of mine.
Right, from St. Louis fame, right? With the Weehall.
I'll tell you, the funny part was we're standing in the staging lanes, and I'm talking to Rich, and he's getting ready to put his fire jacket on it. And I look up on his roof, and he sets down a can. It's a can of Pabst Ribbon beer. He's drinking in the staging lanes. That was Rich. And anyway, we went up and ran, and I had him by just a couple feet, I think. And I broke a valve spring in 4th gear at the big end, and it nosed over, and he got around me. Valve springs were a real issue back in those days, real issue, because you had to buzz those damn Cleveland small blocks. We were running factored, pounds per cubic inch according to whatever engine and brand and so forth and body style you had. And the Cleveland was the worst one. We had to weigh 7.3 pounds per cubic inch at that time.
You carried the most weight out of all of them?
Yeah, well, and then, of course, he ended up with stroked engines and whatever and all that. But, so anyway, I ran AHRA for several years, and I damn near won the championship in '82. I was leading, and I ran out of parts.
Well, and you were kind of a leader in the AHRA's not so well known nitrous pro stock small block, right?
Yeah, that's a funny thing too. That started in '81. What happened was mid-1980, I buy an engine from Jack Roush. It was a 353 cubic inch. It had stock stroke, but they turned the crank down to 2-inch and put a real long connecting rod in it. And it worked really great. And the Zephyr was brand new.
Oh,
and
that was Zeke.
Yeah, that's Zeke, the chassis craft car. It was black then, originally. And we went down there for the Gateway Nationals with that setup. In fact, that engine had been in Superfly, the Mustang 2. The guys that had that, they ran it at Gainesville, put the car upside down on the first run. So the engine didn't have hardly any time on it. It didn't hurt the engine. So somehow Jack ended up with it, and he sold it to me. Sold me that engine, carburetors to pan, aluminum water pump, everything for $6,000 back then.
Well, that's about twice the price of a regular car.
Yeah. But anyway, we qualified number 1 by about 800ths. I mean, I had it covered. And
800ths is a lot.
And then the next weekend, let's see. Yeah, the next weekend we went to Cordova, and we had a Mid-America circuit race, and I won that against Jerry Haas in the final again. And then I went to Humboldt, Iowa to match with our Mid-America Pro Stock circuit, and I was running Jerry Haas the first round, and the car shook the tires real hard. And when I pulled third gear, second gear or third gear, anyway, the car went towards Jerry first. So I cranked it, let off, and cranked hard to the right. Now it's going towards the guardrail and the fan standing there. So I crank it back left, and it peels the right front tire off the rim because it pirouetted so bad. When I shook the tires, it had a sway bar in the back, and the tires hit the sway bar and bent it and jacked the weight counterclockwise, put a bunch of weight in the wrong place.
Oh.
And I rolled the car over one complete time.
Well, I remember when I first went up there to Humboldt to look at the track when we were looking at considering picking up North Iowa Dragway. That was the story they told me about you. That the one race they remember from Humboldt is Animal Jim going upside down through the lights.
Yeah, there's a picture of it on my. In fact, it's up right now. There's a picture of it on my website, and shows a picture of me upside down with dust flying, and then it shows me standing there with a couple people, and then Gary Duckworth is standing there looking at it, and it was wrinkled up pretty good. So we sent it to back to Chassis Craft, and Woody Mays fixed her up. But anyway, so that was my second crash, and but anyway, we had a terrific combination with the Zephyr and that 353, and I had a couple other engines too, but that really hit it good. But what happened, this is what brought on the nitrous deal, was the AHRA in the middle of the season, 1980, they decided to mirror the IHRA rules, and they went to unlimited cubic inch, which the IHRA did that in 78. NHRA didn't do it until 82, I think. And they went with 500 inch. But anyway, AHRA went just the same rules as IHRA. Unlimited cubic inch at a set weight. So they had to wait for small blocks and big blocks, but any cubic inch you wanted. The problem was the small block cars couldn't get that light because they were built to be around 2350 to 2450 pounds because of the way the factors turned out,
right,
with the cubic inch per pound deal. So anyway, in the interim, but the big blocks they could get them down to 2350, but we couldn't get down to 2150. So anyway, Mike Thermos from NOS and a couple other nitrous companies, Laser was one of them, and whatever, they lobbied the AHRA and talked them into allowing nitrous, because it would give them an arena in a professional category to show their wares, to allow nitrous for small blocks only. Of course, you had to put an additional weight in, which I think was 250 pounds over the base weight.
Okay.
And then if you had canted valves, you had to add 50 more pounds.
Of course, because that Cleveland needed more weight.
Then the Cleveland needed more weight, yeah. Unless you're running an old 318 Plymouth.
Yeah, I don't think there was many poly racers out there, I bet.
But what's really funny about it, I'd call Jack Roush, and we were going to build I even sent him, I think, $6,000 or something like that, and he was going to start building a 600 and some cubic inch Voss 429 for me. And back then, now, the Fords, all the stuff we were using to build even a big block or a small block with were still factory castings. There wasn't any aftermarket pieces.
Okay. So even the cranks?
Oh, especially the crank, yeah. Yeah, I mean, even with the small blocks, we ran Moldex cranks. There was times we ran stock ones, but when we got to the bigger engines, we ran Moldex or Chroma shaft cranks.
Okay.
And we went to, but anyway, I was actually against the nitrous thing, and Zeke was getting redone, and in the meantime, I was driving Ray Ackland's car with my engine in it. It was a Gene Lynch Pinto, and that's when we went to Dragway 42 and found out it was unlimited cubic inch, and there we are. With my biggest engine was a 366, and it's pretty hard to compete.
Right.
So anyway, we do what we can, and in the winter of 80, 81, the car's getting just about done. I get a call from Mike Thermos from NOS, and he says, I hear you got some pretty good Cleveland stuff and a good car that's being repaired right now. I said, yeah. I said, it's a good car. And he offered to pay my way to run the AHRA events the next year. And I said, well, I never ran. And he says, you still got some of that Cleveland stuff left? So I told him, I said, well, Jack Rouse is starting to build a mountain motor for me, which at that time would have been a mountain motor. Now it wouldn't be. But back then, 40 years ago it was.
Oh, yeah, 600 cubic inches was almost unheard of.
So anyway, I made an agreement with Mike, and I sent one of my manifolds in, and he plumbed it up and whatever. Or no, we didn't have plumbing then. We ran plates. We were running plates then yet. It was before the foggers. We were running plates. And so he sent me all the nitrous stuff I needed and whatever. So first event, by the time the car got done and so forth and so on, I put that 353 in, and I put the nitrous plates under it, and we ended up qualified. Let's see, it was an 8-car field, and I ended up number 5. So number 1 ran 5. Number 1 was Warren Johnson with a big block.
Right.
So he beat me, not by a whole lot, but he did. But man, I picked up 3/10 right now with that nitrous, and I was pretty impressed with it. So before the year was out, I was up at Jack Roush's one time picking some stuff up in Livonia. I was coming from Canada, and I looked over at the shelf where he had engines apart, and he had this aluminum block 427 Cleveland short block. So I bought that and put it together, and man, that thing really ran. In fact, was it 81 or 82 at Wentzville? I was match racing Jerry Haas, and we ran in the 7s with it at 2,600 pounds.
Would that have been like a Fontana block or?
No, it was a Ford block. It had Ford numbers. They were built for Can-Am.
Oh,
and they were 4/125 bore with sleeves. And the main caps is what was neat. The 3 center mains had 6. There were 6 bolt mains. The third one went right in the pan rail, so the pan had to be notched for that, and you had to fill it full of silicone. So the whole pan was fastened with silicone. You didn't even use any gaskets except the end gaskets.
Were you guys using a wet sump at that time still then?
What was that?
You were still using a wet sump at that time, or were you had already moved to a dry
Oh, yeah,
sump?
we were using a wet sump, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the typical Roush design pan, either his or Moroso had a copy of them.
Okay. Well,
they were rear sump pans. They held about 10 quarts of oil. You took a high volume milling pump and put the big spring in, and of course the blocks were highly prepared too. You had restrictors in the galleys and stuff to keep the oil at the bottom and so forth. But anyway, that 427, I had 3 of those before it was over.
huh.
They ran damn good. So we won several races and set a bunch of records and whatever with the nitrous small block. But then by 83, even though we did good out at Tucson at the Winter Nationals, we started falling behind. And one of the problems was you couldn't hold the head gaskets in the damn Clevelands. Nobody made a copper head gasket yet. And CNC machines were something in the future. So the best gasket we found to use with an O-ring and studs was the McCord Boss 351 gasket, the regular McCord gasket.
Right.
And but anyway, when you qualified on Friday and Saturday, if you made 3 runs or 4 runs, you spent the night putting new head gaskets in, because they'd only last 4 runs. And on the right side of the block, which would be towards the rear on the driver's side, and towards the front on number 1 on the right side, passenger side, there's a real small area between a water port and the fire ring area of the head gasket, and that would start to lift. So now you'd be sucking water in that cylinder, and it'd start popping at the big end, sometimes all the way down. So you knew you were out of luck. So we'd spend the night we spent a lot of nights working on shit. If we didn't melt a piston, we'd be putting gaskets in or whatever. And my funny car buddies used to tease me, says, "Animal, you're in the wrong pit. You should be over here with us, working all night. Get your shit back together."
Well, and you know, that's one thing we didn't cover was, and it's not very obvious, but where did your name come from?
My original car, the Big Animal. Yeah, we had such a clique of regulars at Oswego and US 30, run tough eliminator. And everybody named their cars back then. There was Daddy's Thing, Grandpa's Toy, and so forth. Tinker Toy, Good and Plenty, whatever. All the cars had names, and mine was the Big Animal. But you started calling to who you got to run. Oh, we're going to run Thing, or we're going to run Toy, or Daddy's Toy, or whatever. And they just referred to me as Animal, you know.
Oh, right.
So the first time I put Animal Jim on a car was with my Pinto when I bought it. I decided, well, I can't call it the Little Animal. That's demeaning, you know. So anyway, I thought I'm going to put Animal Jim on there because now a lot of racers are using personal nicknames.
Right.
So that was the first Animal Jim deal. But it came from the Big Animal.
Okay.
That's where and how the Big Animal got its name was I was finishing up that car in 1968, 69, and before I moved to Lakin, when I was still single at 22 years old, I had a black Mercury, brand new R code 427 4-speed, and it ran really well. It was hardly anybody could beat the damn thing, and one of my buddies would be quoted as saying, that black Mercury comes out of the hole like a big effing animal. Well, I left the adjective out. I says, we're going to call this car the Big Animal. Yeah, the guy that called it, that ended up buying that car from me.
Oh, really?
The 63 Merc, yeah.
Well, I take it
my
you
website, there's a picture of it. The first entry in my website is a picture of me with that Mercury.
Well, you must have been a Mercury man through and through then, right?
I had a lot of Mercs, yeah. Some Fords. Even drove a Lincoln once, but it wasn't mine. We had the lethal Lincoln.
Is that the Mark 8?
Yeah. Yeah, that belonged to Bob Garatuga.
Okay.
Yeah, that was after my 96 crash at Englishtown when I destroyed the Wonderbird again. History of the Pro Mod thing, that started with Bill Kuhlman.
Okay.
And when he went 200, I saw what was going to happen, and I was going to have to run him in UDRA because you were allowed to run nitrous in UDRA, but nobody ever did it with a good engine. You know, with a big engine like that, a good engine. It was primarily put in there to bring some lesser people up to par, so they could run with the better cars. And nobody ever did it with a better car until Bill did it. And what's funny about that is the December of 1986, he and I had a meeting at Springfield, Illinois. That was halfway for each of us. And we were going to put together a match race, 4-car or 8-car thing and whatever. And we were going to have blown or nitrous cars and run 200 miles an hour in a door slammer. Huh. So we got that idea and put it on paper, and we called several promoters. We called Brett Kepner, and we called Dwayne, and finally Jeff Burke, and some others. And finally, we called our match race promoter that we dealt with, Dwayne Nichols, and he was also president of UDRA. And he said, "Oh, he says, before we can advertise 200-mile-an-hour cars," he says, so that reality hit us. So Bill and I were talking about that. Parents were doing bad. My dad had died. My mother had to go to a nursing home, and as we were dealing with all that all winter long, and I'd forgot all about that deal. Well, Bill didn't. He geared for it. And when it finally dawned on me, when the Winter Nationals at AHRA was coming up at Darlington, I told Linda, I says, I got to get away. I'm entering Darlington. And I entered the car in Pro Stock, Mountain Motor Pro Stock. And I get down there, and we're sitting out in the road waiting for the gates to open. And over in the grassy area, the Top Sportsman cars. And there's Bill Kuhlman's car with a big wing and big NOS decals all over it. I thought, holy shit. I said to my crew chief, I said, Al, Bill's going to try and go 200. I know it just as sure as we're sitting here. And he did that night. Watched him do it 2 times.
Huh. Well, I remember in the Midwest, you guys were all legends, because the group that started off, there was only about a handful of you guys, maybe 6 to 8 cars, something like that.
Yeah. It started from many fronts. One was UDRA, especially with Bill and I. And the next race I went to after that was a UDRA opener at Byron, Illinois.
Uh-huh.
And it was a UDRA Nationals. Of course, UDRA had funny cars, alcohol funny cars and dragsters, and usually a couple of wheel standers or something, or a jet car, and then Pro Stock. That was a full event.
Okay.
And so anyway, we get there. By the time we get there, I got my intake manifold, which is in the car right now, is from 1987, a nitrous fogger. And Bill and I ended up in the finals. We swapped records back and forth, and I wasn't using Jessel rocker arms yet. They weren't Jessel rocker arms.
Okay.
And on the burnout, I broke a rocker arm. So it was cutting out and sputtering and whatever. But anyway, I backed up and staged anyway. I thought, well, maybe red light or something. So when I went to go, I just, blew a bunch of black smoke out and didn't work so good. So that was that. So anyway, we fixed it, and we went out and ran here and there and all around and ran. I think Bill and I were 9 finals in UDRA that year. And when he'd said be number 1, I'd be number 2. If I was number 1, he'd be number 2. And I think he might have won a few more than I did, but I won a few too. So I know I won at Kukana for sure, and a couple other places, but it.
Yeah, well, you guys were the dueling duo in the Midwest at that time. Matter of fact, I was going to ask you a question somewhat about that. Out of all the races, who was the racer that you respected the most?
Oh, that'd be hard to answer. There were so many. Bill, of course, he and I became good friends. We were arch rivals, but good friends.
Right.
And, I ran with so many guys. Wayne Torkelson, he was a match race with him a lot. In fact, I probably match raced with Wayne Torkelson more than anybody over the years because of the Fun Fords.
Oh,
there was
Fun Ford
Fun
weekends?
Fords of 10 races, yeah. and that guy that ran that deal, he hired Torkelson and I finally for all 10 one year. But I ran Norm Wisner and Ronnie Sox, and then another one is Robbie Vandergriff, yeah.
Yeah.
He had the yellow 57. Robbie was awesome too. And Charles Carpenter. I don't know. There's just so many that, I apologize if I'm leaving somebody out, but there was just a bunch of us that just keyed on that. And then in '89, in '88, I won they had the first Quick 8 in Top Sportsman at that national event. And I won, and I raced Robbie in the final. It was heads up Quick 8.
Right.
With a ladder. It wasn't dial yourself in. It was heads up. And Robbie and I ended up in the final, and I barely beat him. It was a pedal fest. It was midnight and damp. We were shaking tires and everything. And In fact, I was sitting down there waiting and waiting and waiting. I wondered what the hell's going on. All of a sudden, I heard a big cheer. And what was going on, we were the last two to run. And then they were going to run the jet car. Well, they were checking to make sure I didn't center line. And they walked out there and looked at a big crowd following them out there. And the guy pointed the thumbs up on my lane that I was a winner.
Huh.
So anyway, it was something else.
Yeah, well, that was that's what I was referring to as the group of 8. That really made it happen was that I remember was Charles Carpenter and Robbie Vandergrift and you and Bill Kuhlman. Those are the big names I do remember running around the Midwest. That was, I guess you would call it the pioneers of pro mod, and I don't think it really was called pro mod at that time, right?
No, not until '90. That's interesting too. In fact, sometime in '90 or whatever, I think Hot Rod Magazine had some articles about us, and they actually named Bill and I and Robbie and I think Charles as the fathers of pro modified.
Right.
They actually said it.
Well, what was funny is I saw pro mod come out. Well, when I was in the Navy, it started to get kind of big, and you're like, hold on a minute, this is all recycled stuff, because pro mod's been happening in the Midwest for at least 10 years now. So
yeah,
this stuff was kind of funny.
Yeah, well, we started in '89. We had another meeting and whatever, and Bill and my idea, like in 1986, kind of came to blossom in 1989. We were at the UDRA banquet, 1988, and at the Afterglow, and we'd been talking about it and dealing with it and whatever, and we were told Dwayne Nichols we could put together a circuit of us guys that were outlaw pro stock door slammer cars, nitrous and blown, and have a circuit of stars, kind of like the Coca-Cola Cavalcade of Stars did with funny cars. And that's where that was born.
Oh, that's cool.
Because Dwayne was kind of worried. He says, well, we won't have the biggest names like they did back then or whatever. And Ron Colson standing there, he says, right here are your biggest names. And he pointed to me and Bill. He says, right here you got them. And so Dwayne Nichols actually owned the U.S. Super Circuit. He was the owner. And what was neat about it was each one of us that ran in it had our own separate contract with Dwayne.
Okay.
Nobody got paid. Nobody knew as the other guy was getting paid. Nobody got paid the same. Everybody didn't get the same money and whatever. If a guy was a hitter, in the way it worked, he'd try and have like 10 cars show up. The U.S. Super Circuit. And all 10 cars would run twice, qualify. Then 8 would come back, and you'd run a 8-car ladder. One would run 5, so forth and so on. The 2 quick winners would come back. The 2 quick losers, the 2 quick losers got semi-money, and the other 4 got first-round money.
Okay.
Which is basically show-up money.
Right, tow money, yeah.
But if you were a hitter, like Bill or me or Sox or Robbie or like that or Charles, what you could win was a lot less than some of the guys that were lower. But the show-up money was a lot more.
Right.
So anyway, but it still gave you incentive. Then we had the first few races, we had burnout and wheel stand contests. But the newer cars weren't doing wheelies, and so the Zephyr was winning almost every time on the wheel stand in a lot of burnout contests.
Oh, well,
Zeke had the best burnout every race. I think by the second year we gave up on the wheel stand part, and because the newer cars didn't do that.
Right.
And but mine did.
Yeah, but Zeke always had the best launch. It was like left twisted up and pissed off about every pass that I've ever seen.
Yeah, it was an amazing car,
Yeah. Well, who built that one?
Greg Kaplan, actually owned Chassis Craft in Elk Grove Village up by Chicago.
Okay.
And it was built right next to Warren Johnson's car. And that was one reason it was a 3-link, because Woody and Kaplan knew that I was a chassis expert, that I'd worked for Bear Alignment at Indy on Indy cars. And and Warren had a 3-link. And a 3-link has got 2 lower bars, which are longer than normal, and a 4-link. Then the upper bar is off the rear end center, like an old Mercury station wagon.
Okay.
It's off center, off the where the pumpkin goes in to the right.
Okay.
And of course, it had big heavy brackets and bolts and stuff.
So it's like
And
a
you could
panhard
move
rod.
And you could use different length upper rods or move them up and down, back and front. And then it had a big stack of washers on each side, 3/4 inch. Well, they were 5/8 bolts and washers, and that squared the car up. So when you went out to run the car and it was fresh or new, you had it apart, and it wanted to romance to the right out of the gate, you would move the bar 1 washer that way, both front and back, and that would usually take care of it. Once you got that thing set that way, you very, very, very seldom had to screw with it.
Huh. All right.
That thing would launch beyond belief.
Oh,
The big
yeah.
thing is, 3-link, it would twist real bad, because after I crashed it with that sway bar, we left the sway bar off. But,
You didn't run a sway bar again after that?
But I had to crank a bunch of weight in the left front. I wouldn't now because I'm so fat, but back then I only weighed about 200 or 190, and I got like 200 more pounds cranked into the left front strut. So
Well,
and it still twists.
And Jim, well, we're kind of running out of time here, but I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. Until next time, I guess we'll go ahead and sign off, and the crowd can chew on that. How's that?
But anyway, it's been a pleasure.